process you're going to go over in the next 3 weeks, 6 reviews, the 7th is if needed. You got a ton of information. The first things I'm going to be talking about was stuff that we talked about in September of your sophomore year. In fact, the first week of September, your sophomore year. And somehow or other, we got to call it back into your mind in a way that you can transfer it to a test. And then you got to hold it there for the next month. So think of it this way. Think of a scaffold. Something that you put up alongside a building. Okay? When people are painting or doing construction on a building. And the whole idea of a scaffold is it's these layers held together by these metal or steel rods, and they can bear a great deal of weight. That's what you have to do. You have to get the big picture themes, and they have to be able to bear a great deal of weight. That means those themes have to be clear, and I think concisely put to you, and then you have to do the work of how much weight can I put on each theme? How much weight can I bear as we go through each theme? So if you look at the review, I've broken this review, which essentially goes from somewhere in the 15th century all the way up to the French and Indian War, about 5 centuries worth. I broke it into the earliest Americans. The second one is Europe discovery. In other words, European discovery of the Americas. It already existed, but what Europeans discovered, why it happened, where it happened. Then we go to the Spanish model of colonization, or imperialism, God, gold, and glory. The British colonization, what form that took, the Protestant wind. Economic colonialism, there's a lot of themes there. Then we get to the duel for the North American continent. By the way, I finished this period 10, so there's some typos in there. It is what it is. I didn't get a chance to proofread it. We'll make that correction as we go along. Those are essentially your big layers in this scaffold. And we're going to load as much in as we can. So the big picture themes are highly important. And my mistake in the past is I've gotten too detailed sometimes, and therefore rushed to get through. So I'm going to try to keep it with the big picture themes as we go through. So, any questions before we get ready to go? Last year there was a question. Mr. Nash will probably know the exact form of it. Having to do with the earliest Americans and pre-Columbian America. Who was here before Europeans came? So just in case, we start with the earliest Americans. Approximately, estimated at, can be nothing other than 54 million, estimated. Native people to this country, I doubt they're going to go anything with regards to the land bridge and how they got here. 54 million people, and let's be clear, of those 54 million, we have to consider them all civilized. They're civilized. Just civilized in a different way than Europeans, but they're all civilized. And some civilizations will rise to the level of a European civilization, even in Europeans' minds, such as the Aztecs. They are highly diverse. We cannot group them all as Native Americans and they're all of one type. They are highly diverse people. But they are going to share some common characteristics which we'll try to draw out. Many of the civilizations by European standards are tremendously advanced. And I would bid that you go to the textbook on this and get some of the advancements there if you want to load more onto that. But those are the characteristics I draw out. They are all civilized. Don't take the European definition of that. They are all civilized to some degree. They are highly diverse yet have common characteristics. And some, even by European standards, are tremendously advanced. We'll get to which ones in a minute. So that's the first area, the earliest Americans. First area. Now, what permitted a population to grow from some that walked across a land bridge and filtered down through those centuries down all the way to South America to 54 million? And the primary theme here is agriculture, maize, corn, growing from the ground. Once you can grow something from the ground, you no longer have to be nomadic. Being nomadic is what? What is being nomadic?
You travel around to gather food and look for food?
You follow your food source, yeah. If you don't have to do that, you can settle. Once you can settle, your population can expand. So you are not mobile enough as a small community or as a large community to follow a food source. So nomadic tribes are by definition small. Once you can grow things from the ground and sustain your population, then you can settle. With the settlement comes expansion. And now the population expands. So first is maize. It transforms nomadic tribes, to semi-nomadic and then finally agricultural tribes. Now, with that settlement, you can expand your population. Now we start spreading, and the spread goes unevenly. And we are most concerned in Honors US 1 with Central America and North America. So, Central America, the primary tribes that you want to get some information about, the Incans in Peru, the Mayans in Central America, and probably most importantly the Aztecs in modern-day Mexico. Of the 54 million, the Aztecs constitute about 20 million. That's extraordinary. One native tribe constitutes about a third of all native people in the Americas. But even more so than them, we want to now transfer to the spreading of these cultures to the North American continent, and we're going to focus on the Pueblo of southwestern America, modern-day New Mexico, Arizona. Now we're going to go to the southeastern Atlantic area, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee. Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee. I'm really just bringing them out to set you up for Jackson Native American removal. And then you're going to go up to the northeastern Atlantic area, the Iroquois. Together, all the North American native tribes, 4 million. 4 million of the 54 million. 4 million. The Aztecs alone are 5 times more than all Native American tribes on the North American continent. So, in your notes there, write underpopulated, relatively underpopulated, the North American continent, which will explain why the obstacle for America was not quite as stiff as maybe even the obstacle for the Spanish when they came. With this, however, the 4 million Central American Indians, the Aztecs, there are common features you need to know, and it will help explain why this all ends up as it ends up. And for Honors US 1, maybe the beginning of Honors, or AP US 2, you're getting to the Battle of Wounded Knee and the end of the Indian Nation as we know it. There's a common feature that I summarized in the notes there. One of the common features that really distinguished Native American tribes, but hurt them in the end, is that they endowed the physical world with spiritual properties. Once you see gods in every element of the natural world, the physical world, you don't try to control it. You don't try to control it. The natural world is endowed with gods. What you try to do is you try to please it. What that means is you try to live in harmony with the natural world. You don't try to dominate it. Just for a side note, what does Europe do? Europe tries to dominate the physical world. I mean, that's what the whole Industrial Revolution is. It's to act upon the physical world to produce bigger, better, faster, more, greater. And when that industrial kind of mentality, capitalist kind of mentality, mercantile kind of mentality comes in contact with this mentality, when it gets to a strategic fight, it's going to be an unfair fight. That common feature goes among the native tribes, and I think is a very important one to bring to brought out. They want to please the physical world, to grant them abundance. They don't want to dominate the physical world to produce new things, bigger things, better things. Questions on the earliest Americans, just in case you get a question on your AP test. Any questions to clarify anything there? Now we pick up pace. All right? So, European discovery. Why it happened, where it happened. I'm not going to tie myself specifically to this outline as we go through. So, don't get thrown if we're just a little bit off. First of all, the primary incentive of going out to the world is what it always has been. And beyond adventure, it's that there's something to be found. And that something to be found is, they throw in Marco Polo at the beginning of your book. Comes word from the East. There's great riches there. There's exciting products. There's advanced people. We need contact. And that is the incentive to go out. and it's east of Europe. But initially, the pathway east is either overland, which is terribly difficult, or by this water route. You go through around the Indian continent, South Asian Indian continent, Indian Ocean, Persian Gulf, in through the straits into the Mediterranean. It's harrowing, it's dangerous, there's Muslim raiders, it's a real challenge. It's not safe and it's expensive. So there has to be a cheaper way to get those riches in the east. What is the country that first finds that way? Come on, you guys are fading on it. Yep. Portugal. And they do it in a couple ways. They don't even intend to do it at first. They start going down the African coastline. They talk about those winds that keep it hard to come back. Well, they figured out a way, a new kind of ship that will allow them to return to Europe if they go down the African coast. Once they do that, they get to sub-Saharan Africa. And they get two things from there: gold and slave labor. But the Portuguese don't stop exploring. They keep going further south until they find the Cape of Good Horn and around the bottom of Africa. And now they have a less dangerous, cheaper passage to the Far East and South Asia. The Portuguese found a safer, cheaper passage east, and in the process also found gold and slave labor. The Portuguese way ahead of everybody else in 15th century Europe. Spain is their primary competitor. Spain makes a decision: we want to compete with Portugal, but not on their terms. We don't want to go east. What does Spain want to do? It's the only option. We'll find the same things going west. Well, isn't that a lot longer? What's the answer to that in 50? What explains that? That we're going to go west around the globe to find the same things that Portugal is going to find going east. What's the answer? Why were they just dumb? Why did Spain go west?
They didn't know about the continents there.
They have no idea how far it is. They don't know there's continents. They don't know all the obstacles. They're just going. And they don't do it initially with a Spaniard. They do it with an Italian, Columbus. But they are going to fund it, and they are going to go west in competition with Portugal, who's going east. But understand, the incentive is the same. They're looking for the riches of South and Eastern Asia. Now, before we get to Columbian exchange, there is a wonderful couple of paragraphs early in your book. It's one of the things the book does well, and I just summarized it with detail here. This sums up the theme. As you get to the late 15th century, as you get to 1492 and Columbus and the ocean blue and all that nonsense, this summarizes conditions coming together for what the book called a cataclysmic change, not just in European history, but in world history. All the conditions are right. There's the incentive of Europe's demand for Asian goods. There's the introduction of African slave labor, which will eventually lead to a plantation economy. There's the introduction of long-range sea travel, first by the Portuguese and adapted by other European powers. There's Spanish unity, wealth, and power that allows them to rival Portugal in this competition. Throughout Europe, there's the Renaissance, which puts into people a spirit of adventure, use of reason, and a value of science, which leads to innovations like the printing press and the mariner's compass, without which those two have mentioned, maybe there's not the belief or the knowledge to get to where they want to go. That is a wonderful paragraph that connects so many themes for you in this era. Questions? Off of this, you should understand what is pushing, because my title there is Why It Happened, Where It Happened. Why was it Spain that came west? Because Portugal moved east. Why did it happen where it happened? Because Columbus was looking for a passageway, and he ran into some land. Questions here? Once Columbus finds these Indies, the book calls it what was the wording of it? The most successful failure. What did I have written there? I love that. Again, give the book credit. Why is it a successful failure? Why is this a successful failure? Hey guys, if you're going to daydream, that's fine. I don't know why you're doing this, though. I mean, you can get this on film. But if you're going to be here, be a participating member and jump in.
Because it was unintentional finding the Americas, but it was also something that was very beneficial to them.
Yeah. Who's them? Spain. The success is in the succeeding century. The failures, he thought it was where? Because he thought it was India. The same ocean that they were passing through by the previous route. That's how far off he was. He was more than half a world off. So it's a failure. It didn't hit where he planned to go. Boy, what success came from that failure. I love that framing of it. Again, we're building themes here that you're loading on detail to. Now, the Columbian Exchange is a just awkward thing, and they kind of throw it in here. But this is a century-long thing. The Columbian Exchange is nothing more than a label that history has given to this exchange of goods from the old world to the new. The old world being Europe and the Eastern Hemisphere, the new world being the Americas. Both exchange crops to the other. Some crops are more indigenous to one hemisphere or the other. I don't know how important it is to list the crops, so I didn't. Far more important, I think, is the gold and silver that comes from the new world to the old, and the military advantages that come from the old world to the new. So, from America to Europe, gold, silver crops, and a sexually transmitted disease, syphilis. From Europe to America, crops, horses, livestock, a gun, and many diseases, which eventually will wipe out the greatest number of native people. And, don't forget, from Africa came a seemingly unending source of slave labor. And what the Columbian Exchange, if you want to put a side comment, does is it permanently changes both worlds, for the better or for the worse. So now we get to Spain. God, gold, and glory. Just so you don't only hear my voice, somebody read the summary that I wrote to clarify God, gold, and glory. Pat, you're theatrical.
In the service of God, conquistadors search for gold and other riches for Spain and glory for themselves.
One more time.
In the service of God, conquistadors search for gold and other riches for Spain and glory for themselves.
What version of God? Important distinction. What version of God?
The Christian one?
Be more specific. Be more specific.
Jesus?
Be more specific. Roman Catholic. Because Jesus, Judeo-Christian traditions, and Christianity are all included in both Catholicism and Protestantism. But you have to see the distinction. Catholicism is a Spanish. Spain is a Catholic country. England will become a Protestant country. And they both use that as a distinguishing thing against each other. We talked about this just today when we once again brought up Manifest Destiny. And we were talking about Manifest Destiny in class today. And we said this was not a new idea, this argument that God was on your side. Spain, God's on our side, but it's a Catholic God. And He wants us to go out and dominate areas of the world. And that will bring us gold, riches, which God wants, and glory, which God wants. Their argument, not mine. Now, God, gold, and glory begins with this idea of the Treaty of Tordesillas. This is a weird thing. They divide a hemisphere. Just because. 1794, this is draw a line, and if you look at the map, it's a straight line down through. The straight line, everything to the west of that line is Spanish, everything to the east of that line is Portuguese, but it doesn't divide anything except South America. It gives Spain exclusive rights to Central in North America. And I love the wording in the book, divide the heathen lands. What's a heathen?
Uncivilized person.
Uncivilized. Any other characteristic?
Without a God.
Godless. We're going to divide this heathen land among us Christian people. And that's for their benefit as well as ours, at least that's what they tell themselves. So that gives Central and North America, Spain has exclusive domain there. And they're going to go ahead and be in charge up there. And in doing so, there's a host of conquistadors. I could list them all. What's the point? You can find those for a review. That's the kind of detail you're loading onto the theme. I think the theme of conquistadors is best exemplified by Hernán Cortés, Mexico. Because the theme plays out in dramatic kind of illustration. The story of Cortés starts off in Cuba, modern-day Cuba. gears up with supplies and he extends out to Mexico. He encounters the most developed society, the Aztecs, and they welcome him. They welcome him. They say, come on in. They give him gold. They give him riches, silver. They give him gifts. They give him great adulation. They think these horses are amazing. They think they may be some sort of gods. They're welcome. And initially, the response of the Spanish is also kindly, until the desire for wealth gets too much of them. Now the horses and the guns they bring are turned upon the people who welcome them, and they dominate. From that domination, they take the gold and the silver and they send it back to enrich the empire. But the Spanish feel they have an obligation to Christianize these heathens, these savages, as they define them. But disease is the unintended consequence. Within a century, the Aztec population went from 20 million to 2. Within a century. And it wasn't because this band of raiders, the conquistadors, killed 18 million. Disease killed far more. This interaction was fatal to the most developed civilization in the Western Hemisphere by European standards, the Aztec. But it brought Spain great wealth and power. I think the illustration of what this interaction is best done with Cortez in Mexico. So you can go to Pizarro and Ponce de Leon and all the rest of them. But I don't think, I'm going to leave that to you guys. I'm going to go to the common effects, and mostly on the native population. And here I have a big disagreement with your textbook. Your textbook says, the textbook diminishes the black legend if you go back and read that section. And they say it's an unfair characterization. What's unfair about it? The black legend is simply this idea that European colonization brought torture, death, and a raping of the wealth and culture of native societies. Well, it did. The book's point is it's unfair to illustrate or to emphasize only that. But the way they write it is curious to me. Be careful of that bias. You cannot diminish death. 20 million to 2 in the Aztec alone? That's a significant thing. There was no wealth in the Aztec community at the end of this. They did take the wealth, etc. So the black legend holds for me as a real strong theme. The encomienda system. What an interesting idea this is. The monarch in Spain will commend, give to settlers a group of people. I give you the Mayans here. Now, you get to do with what you want, and they will be labor for you. But on the other side, you as Spaniards have an obligation to Christianize them, civilize them, as the encomienda system. Mestizos. Mexican people are a mixture of blood. Spanish and native people from the area. Mixture of Native Americans and Spanish people. Mestizos are a product of this. Now, there are cultural things that come into this, which is what the book wants to emphasize. And trust me, the Aztecs practiced things culturally that we would absolutely be repulsed by. And maybe this led them away from things like human sacrifice. That's the book's idea there. And then the last one I have there, plantation and slave economies are entered in. So, questions on God, Gold, and Glory? Finally, we get to English-speaking people. English colonization. Now this should become more familiar, I think. And in my opinion, the story picks up a little bit. That's my opinion. You have the English watching this. Now remember, in Europe, they're all in competition with each other. By the way, what does gold and silver and great wealth bring to a European nation? Power. It's always turned into military power. And foreign policy back then was war. Diplomacy? What are you talking about? Foreign policy is war. If you have power, you expand. If you don't, you lose. So English watch in Spain become more and more powerful. So, what do? They have to find a way to this. And they at first try to adapt the Spanish model. The early attempts are absolute failures. Roanoke. And what's the other one? Newfoundland? No, not yet. First one was a failure. There was another one up in Newfoundland somewhere. I can't remember. You don't need to remember. We're not to Jamestown yet. All right? They're failures. They're small ventures. Roanoke's a great example because they go back with a later expedition and find nothing. So early failures. But something turns for them, and it's really what they call the Protestant wind. The Protestant wind is talking about what? This Protestant wind. There's a battle with the Spanish where? And it's going very badly. The English are going against the strongest navy in the world, the Spanish Armada. Suddenly the wind shifts. These small mobile English ships get the advantage. And they have victory over the strongest navy in the world, 1588, an improbable victory. The Protestant wind is at our back as we now push out into the world and do what Spain had done. Ah, see, now it's not a Catholic God who's on your side. It's a Protestant God that's on your side. The same theme in a different form. The Protestant wind is at the back of England. And again, your book has a wonderfully descriptive couple of paragraphs. Now, I put page 27 and 28. That's in the old. We have so many different versions going on. I can't keep track. But it's in that section, Elizabeth energizes England, and the one just before. All these things are present now as the 16th century ends. And by the way, they're all the conditions that were present in Spain a century before. For instance, if you look at it, there's religious and political unity under a popular monarch. Who's the monarch in England? Oh, they made so many movies about this lady.
Elizabeth.
She's Protestant. She's converted to Protestantism. And when the monarch of England converts, the Catholic Church, or the Church of England converts, it is now a Protestant nation unified under a popular monarch, just like Spain was unified a century before. And then they go into all the other things that are present. The South, or the North Atlantic is now safe for travel because the English Navy can defend itself against the Spanish Armada. You have opportunity for people to go out. You have a population growth in England. You have rising unemployment, so people will be willing to get on rickety ships and go across an ocean. You have this thirst for adventure, this thirst for religious freedom, all of which are going to be motives for going out and colonizing. And then they develop in their law something called joint stock companies and limited liability, where you can invest in a company and not lose a great, but gain a great deal. You're not going to lose any more than you invest initially, but you could gain multiple times on your initial investment. Joint stock companies. All the things are present for now England to launch out again after their early failures, and they do. And now we get to Jamestown. Virginia Company of London. 1606 it gets its charter from King James, and off they go. They land at Jamestown, and I broke it down into very simple segments. They're going to have early struggles. And then they're going to do some necessary things to survive. And then in the course of that survival, they're going to find something that will ensure their long-term success and viability as colonies. So, what are these? I think they went with 144 men and boys on a ship and go off. How many did they land with? Anybody remember that number? Believe it or not, this usually sticks.
58.
No, not that many. God, they lost about that many. They landed with 104. And then by the following spring, they have 38 left. What's the problem? Well, why?
There's not enough motivation for people to plan for themselves.
When they encountered this, there's not much motivation in these people, these men and boys. Why? Who are they?
A lot of them were rich upper class that didn't work.
Yeah, they invested, and they're there, but they don't want to do labor. And they're stubbornly resisting to really do the necessary things. There's another element here. There's no reproduction when it's just men and boys. You die, you're one down. 10 die, you're 10 down. 100 die, you're 100 down. You've got real problems now. And you have a hostile Powhatan Indian Confederation that will rise up against you. You have a lot of challenges. Disease, malaria, in the swampy Chesapeake area. Now, you have your early struggles. Indian conflict, disease, absence of labor in a harsh environment. What are you going to do? You've got to survive. And here, the survival part, I break into John Smith, who's going to exact kind of a discipline. He who shall not work shall not eat within the community. He's going to be replaced by Captain Thomas Dale, Dale's Law, strict kind of code of behavior and punishment. And Lord De La Ware is going to come in and come up with some discipline against the Native American tribes with Irish tactics. Survival, harsh discipline just to survive. But that can only last so long. What is the element in those early years that allow for long-term success? What element enters in this early time? Cash crop. John Rolfe adapts tobacco to the Virginia soil. And it works. And by the 1620s, it becomes moderately profitable. And by the end of the century, about 30 million pounds of tobacco is exported per year out of the Virginia colony. That's your long-term survival. Cash crop economy. So all those elements are present in the early settlement of Virginia. Before you leave that, and I go to the New England settlement, you got to do this on the side. They're just, it's a long outline anyways. To the side, you have to put the other southern colonies in distinguishing characteristics. For instance, Maryland, the one settled for Catholic toleration. Lord Baltimore. You have the Carolinas. Really, the distinguishing quality there is that it is the entrance to slave codes, which are important. And then eventually you get Georgia, which is that buffer from Spanish Florida and French Louisiana, and also like a debtor college, sort of a charity college, or excuse me, a debtor colony, a charity colony. Okay, so just know the distinguishing characteristics. Then you get to New England. New England, 1607 is Jamestown, Virginia. New England is 13 years later. But wait, they're coming for a totally different reason. And they first leave England in about the same year that Jamestown settled. Who are these people and why are they coming? The New England settlement. The Puritans first leave in 1607. They want to purify the Church of England of Catholic practices. Where do they go initially? Okay. And in the Netherlands, they felt that their children were becoming too Dutch. So we have to find a place that we can practice our religious freedom and still be English. And they target Virginia. And they set sail in 1619 for Virginia, but they miss. What do I mean?
The ship was like off there.
And they end up in modern-day Cape Cod area. And that's not the Virginia boundaries. They have no authority to stay. But they grant themselves authority with the Mayflower Compact. This idea that they are going to establish their own authority to settle is a rebellious act at its beginning. And in that document, they say, we will glorify God, advance the Christian faith, and for the honor of king and country, we settle. They prioritize God and faith above country from the beginning. They set up a crude kind of, I don't know, rule by simple majority. We give over for the common good. Some democratic principles in the Mayflower Compact as well. The Plymouth colony, though, doesn't really grow a great deal. Therefore, it doesn't cause a great deal of tension. A decade later, Massachusetts Bay Colony, a new group of Puritans come. And goodness, they're so much bigger. They're 1,000 people strong. Every level of the economy you would want. They set up a massive colony, Massachusetts Bay Colony, funded by a Massachusetts Bay Company charter, and they're going to set up a city upon a hill, a civilization like you never seen. Think of the metaphor. You're on a hill, the rest of the world's looking at you as the example of what should be. That was their goal. They were going to advance God by being a perfect civilization in Massachusetts. They grow, and they grow fast. Questions so far on, already we have distinctions between the two.
Can you go back to what you said about Dale's Law?
Well, within the colony of Virginia, you need a strict code of discipline because John Smith was injured. He had to go back to England, and they supplemented or put in instead Captain Thomas Dale. It is this strict code of punishment for not following things. Like they've regulated your prayer life, your church life, your work life. There was no freedom of speech. All things you produce were shared with the community as a whole. It was far more communistic in its principles than capitalistic. And there wasn't much tolerance. Why? Because they were trying to survive.
Oh, thank you.
What do you know about the wars?
A common theme that would connect both of those are Native American conflict. For the southern colonies, Powhatan Confederacy is just this confederacy of a lot of native tribes in the Chesapeake Bay region. War in 1614, a war in 1622. First one, Pocahontas and John Rolfe were married as a peace treaty. 1622 really starts with a massacre of English villages. And then a final one is in the 1640s. And by 1680, you can't hardly find a native tribe in the Chesapeake region. They're virtually eliminated. Up in the New England colonies, they have a war 1638-ish. Can't remember the name of that conflict. And then in the 1680s as well, King Philip's War, 1670s, excuse me. So that's a common theme. Other questions?
So what's the major difference between Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay?
Well, let me follow through with Massachusetts Bay and then we'll distinguish out, okay? If the southern colonies grew economically, plantation economies are something all the southern colonies had in common. They introduce a sort of labor. The way New England grows is quite different. I call it descent and division. The Puritans descended from England, come across the ocean, set up their colonies. Once Massachusetts Bay's colony, they don't allow dissent. Once it's established, they don't allow dissent. But people will dissent, like Roger Williams, and now you divide again, and you have a new colony, Rhode Island. John Wheelwright, and you divide again, you have a new colony. East New Hampshire. Thomas Hooker, he dissents, Connecticut. Dissent and division is this idea that in New England, it grew from ideological and religious differences, both to get here and set up their colonies, but then to expand out to multiple colonies, the New England colonies. Now we're going to draw out differences. So, you have these joint stock companies. The early colony and the South were businesses designed to produce money. They eventually become a cash crop economies that benefit England themselves. New England, however, is trade incompatible. Now we have to, let's see. Before we get to that, let's get to middle way for the middle colonies and diversity. It's real quick. In between the New England pattern and the Southern pattern are New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. Perfectly described by your textbook. They are the middle way. They are more agricultural than New England, not as agricultural as the South. They are not as industrial as New England, but far more than the South. They are the perfect description of that. And of those four colonies in the middle way, William Penn's Holy Experiment is worth a read in your textbook. It is a unique colony for a lot of reasons, most tolerant in many ways, and the only one to recruit, very interesting. And New York, which is the one that we acquired from the Dutch. And it is one of the most diverse, but its diversity comes out of trade and commerce in the New York port. So, middle way for the middle colonies. And then the diversity, I just want to give you this theme, all the way up through next week's. It is a myth that the United States was ever unified before our revolution. We are the most diverse group. We don't get along. We don't see ourselves as alike the other colonies. There is such a diversity in the colonial population that I want you to be aware of that theme as we exit out of this book. Questions on that? Now, mercantilism. For those of you who have my class, you know this description. This is going to draw out the difference between the New England pattern and the Southern pattern. Mercantilism, you could define it this way. You could define it as a trade system in which a mother country develops colonies to enrich the mother country. Or you could do this. This graphic organizer that I put in here, a mother country establishes colonies. The colonies really have two purposes. To produce a market for finished goods from the mother country and to provide raw materials. The raw materials are shipped back to the mother country. The raw materials, like, say, tobacco, are going to be produced in the manufactured goods, like chewing tobacco, pipe smoke, cigarettes, cigars. Now, with the added raw materials, they can produce manufactured goods to surplus, more than they themselves can consume. They also become more self-sufficient. They don't need raw materials from other nations. What that does is it increases their exports, but decreases their imports. When exports exceed imports, you have what is called a favorable balance of trade. And here's the key. You're sending out more goods than you're receiving back. You make up the difference in gold and silver. They pay us for our stuff. And that enriches us. Just like Spain got enriched with gold and silver by finding tribes, dominating them, and taking their stuff, England's finding gold and silver through a mercantile system that uses the raw materials of any colony to enrich the mother country by creating a favorable balance of trade. Questions on that? Once you get a clarity on that, you ask a simple question. Which colonial pattern fit best with mercantilism? Which colonial pattern fit best? Because can you produce tobacco on that little rocky island up in the North Atlantic, England? No. Growing season's too short, soil's bad. Nor can you produce rice, indigo, cotton, or any of the southern products that we're going to have. It's very valuable in the South. The products of the South are very valuable to England because they can't produce them otherwise. And they will bring great wealth to England. But you go up to New England, it's trade incompatible. Everything that England can produce, England can produce. And by the way, most of what England can produce from the ground can't be produced in surplus. They're trade incompatible. They don't really have anything that of value to offer England. It's a problem. They don't fit with mercantilism. The South does, New England doesn't. So what is, in this trade incompatibility, what is New England going to do? What's their only option, really? Even not thinking of going through this course, you should be able to figure this out. If you're not of value to England in trade, what do? Now, there's not enough people in the South to provide the market you need. That's not a bad guess, though. But there's just not enough people in the South. Trade with other countries. Trade with the world. But wait, that's outside the mercantile system. You're not supposed to do that as a colony. That's not why we let you set up. You're there to benefit us, England says. But New England has no choice. If they want to be economically viable as their population grows, got to ship their stuff out. And they do. And they take one of their only early surpluses, cold water fish. They ship it to warm water ports. Some of those are in Africa. And in return, they now enter into what Portugal began, slave labor trade. They bring those slaves across the ocean, not to America initially, to the West Indies. Sugar plantations, highly intensive slave labor plantations. They need labor. What do you call that transport of African slave labor from Africa to the West Indies? Horrifying. And we describe it in class. The slave labor, the sugar plantations now produce a product that is transferred back up to New England, and it's not slaves. What product now is transferred back up?
Rum?
Nope. Used for it. Molasses. Sugar in liquid form. Now you go up to New England and you produce from that molasses rum, and you have the beginning of manufacturing, which you then extend out to the world. Triangle trade. This is the triangle trade. Now, a couple of themes that you need to mark on the side. First of all, the shape will change. It doesn't always stay a triangle. It becomes very complex, but the principle is the same. New England establishes trade channels with the world. And that creates a couple of distinguishing characteristics for New England's economy. One, it's diversified. Commerce, shipbuilding, industry. It's not singular, it's diversified. And it creates independence, both economically and in spirit in New England. It's not present in the South. The South, however, is so successfully within the mercantile system, it creates economic dependence on England. They have a guaranteed market for all their stuff. They can produce things that England will exhaust and pay them manufactured goods in return. There is a clear separation between New England's economy and the South's economy that has great importance to later American history. Now, as both of these systems grow, England has this idea, oh boy, what if the practice of New England spreads to the South? What if the South gets the idea they can trade with the world? Then mercantilism falls apart, so we better enforce mercantilism. They try to do it with acts of trade and navigation, and navigation acts. And for a while they try to enforce this. But as of about 1689, the Glorious Revolution, you enter into a period called salutary neglect. The acts of trade and navigation, which are designed to enforce mercantilism, aren't strictly enforced. Salutary neglect. Salutary, what's another word for it?
Beneficial?
Neglect is obvious. It's beneficial to neglect enforcement of laws we pass? Yes. Here's why. One, it's a 3,000-mile ocean. That's pretty expensive and costly to try to enforce trade over an ocean that big, distance. Two, England's almost constantly at war. Between 1689 and the end of the French and Indian War, England, that's 74 years, England's at war 36 of them. That's half the time. And if you're an island, it's hard to fight a war and enforce navigation acts because you need ships. War prevents strict enforcement. And the final part is mutual benefit, beneficial. England's getting rich from our raw materials. We already benefit them. Why the added cost to get their products? Well, they care if New England sends some stuff out. Two, we benefit. We get independence. We get to do our own thing, both economically and politically. We get a lot of leeway. We develop. We're both benefiting from the absence of strict enforcement. Salutary neglect benefits both England and the colonies in many ways. It's just not beneficial or cost adaptive to have strict enforcement. Salutary neglect. 4D there, I wanted to have this full title and I just didn't. Indentured servitude versus slavery. There's another economic theme, and I'll play this out. I call it a cost-benefit analysis, which is kind of a cold way to look at slavery, but you know, viable. Early in our history, indentured servitude was cost-effective. The supply of people willing to come over to work 5 to 7 years from somebody else to receive a plot of land and some, I don't know, freedom dues, corn and things, was endless. Because England's economy struggled. Endless. But by 1670, 1680, England's economy improves, the Industrial Revolution's gearing up, fewer people willing to come, and less land to give out to them once they're free. Bacon's Rebellion. And you have this thing where indentured servitude is getting to be a little bit costly and a little bit dangerous. And a couple other things are happening at the same time. There are slave trade companies that are starting to increase the supply of slaves. There are slave codes coming in through the Carolinas that are increasing the control of the slave population. And laws are being changed to show that you will own not only a slave, but their offspring for generations. You have a shift, 1670s, 1680s, from indentured servitude having more benefits and fewer costs to the late 1690s to the 1700s. Slavery has more benefit than cost. Indentured servitude has more cost than benefit. Wish I could go into that more detail, but you just can't. But you get the idea. If you know this, early in our history, slavery was not nearly as useful or relied upon as slavery. Slavery was not as relied upon as indentured servitude. Indentured servitude was the source of labor. Late 17th century, we transitioned over to slavery being the primary source of labor. That's an economic theme, but it brings up ethical quandaries. I mean, it's as we develop in the 1700s these principles of liberty, of representative government, of natural rights of mankind, it's in direct contradiction to everything we develop on the other side of it. 2, the Middle Passage is a horrifying event, and we know it, but we're in it. So there's going to be real problems with that, more so. Workaday America is just, again, to illustrate this idea of diversity. Diversity is, we have regional economies that both strengthen us as colonies, but will divide us as a nation later. Workaday America shows kind of the origin of that. These regional economies that will strengthen us as colonies, both in our relationship to Britain and ourselves, but will divide us later as a nation, this diversity of our work. Okay? Last section. Questions? So then the book transition, I just used the title of the chapter, I think, Duel for North America. And though Spain's here a little bit, it's really a duel between France and Great Britain. The duel for North America. Again, I'm using a subtitle there. They talk about these early wars, Clash of Empires. They talk about King William's War, Queen Anne's War, King George's War, War of Jenkins here. I don't think the details are all that important. I really don't. I think you need to have common themes coming out of them. The first one, by the way, is 1689 to 1697. The last one, King George's War, is 1740 to 1748. So that's the range we're talking about, 1689 to 1748. Here are the common themes. The establishment of Indian alliances developed in these wars. The development of frontier guerrilla kind of military tactics and strategies that use and are implemented with these Native American alliances developed. And the third theme I've drawn out is these wars don't resolve anything. They expand. The area of conflict expands. If you trace on a map where these conflicts are, they don't get smaller, they get bigger. Which tells me that the rivalry intensifies. It doesn't go down, it intensifies in this period of time. So those are the three themes I drew out of those wars. And all those themes kind of are instructive when you get to the French and Indian War, which is most important for us. The French and Indian War, when you go over major wars in American history, you should always look at the causes, the major events of the war. That includes battles and non-battle events, and the resolution. So the causes. There's a long-term cause, and all you have to do in your notes is point to the arrow above. The long-term cause is exactly that. It is France and Great Britain, two powers of Europe, in rivalry for this continent. But I want to give you another layer to it here. England's claim in the continent is land. They have a large population, about 3 million in the colonies, and they need land, particularly in the south, because they're using that land. England needs land, primarily for agriculture, but also for its population, which is large. France's claim to land here is different. Their population's low. They have a settlement up in Quebec, they have a settlement down in Louisiana, and they have a frontier in between that is stocked full of fur. But they have a low population, so what they need are forts to protect the fur trade. There's your competing land claims. France claims land by forts, England claims land by land claims. And it comes together, here's the immediate cause, in the Ohio River Valley, modern-day Pittsburgh, which is the origin of the Ohio River. That's where it comes to a head, because France builds this fort, Fort Duquesne. And the governor of Virginia, an English governor, says they don't have a right to. We have land claims there. And they send up a young surveyor, 21 years old, with a group of men to make it clear to France, you don't have a right here. We have land claims here. George Washington, the surveyor, is captured for necessity, sent back to tell Dinwiddie, the governor, it's our land. You have the beginning of the war. Because now Washington is sent up as a lieutenant for General Edwin Braddock, and now we're going to get into the major events. The immediate cause is the competing land claims in the Ohio River Valley. The rivalry has come to a head in the Ohio River Valley. And when Washington and his men are defeated, they're sent back with a larger military force. And the early pattern of the war is set and shown and illustrated by the Battle of Fort Duquesne. By Fort Duquesne put, it's all loss. For England, it's all loss. They lose everything. Here's why. They try to fight a traditional European war on a frontier with old, stubborn generals, like Braddock. And the book is very descriptive of the Battle of Fort Duquesne, and you'll get it. They're not going to win this way. The French, on the other hand, are using guerrilla tactics with Native American allies, fighting a frontier war in a frontier. Great success. Next major event, turning point. Pitt's palm of victory. William Pitt becomes the prime minister, and he sees it. We're fighting this war wrong in North America. We need to have younger generals, greater imagination. We need to have increased reliance on the British Navy, our strength. We need to take our focus off the West Indies and bring it up to Canada and dominate there in the St. Lawrence Seaway that comes in. And they try to have a greater reliance on the Iroquois alliance. Turns everything. And it's illustrated best by the Battle of Montreal. A young general, James Wolfe, uses an imaginative tactic, scaling the cliffs, the plains of Abraham. In the morning he comes out and they have a victory. And Montreal is secured, supported by the British Navy. It shows all the elements in the change. So Battle of Fort Duquesne shows the pattern of the early war. The turning point is William Pitt and his strategic change from the prime minister position. Battle of Montreal illustrates the pattern of late war, and it's all victory for England. Questions on that? So now you get to the end of the war. Resolution of war, Treaty of Paris. All you have to do, I can't remember the page number, but there's two maps on a given page in your book. On the left-hand side is North American continent before the French and Indian War. And there's this huge swath in the middle. I can't remember what color it is, but it's France. And you see that color disappear on the right-hand side. France loses all land claims to the North American continent. They keep some fishing rights and island in the Caribbean. Spain and Great Britain essentially divide the North American continent along the Mississippi River. Spain keeps Florida. That's a review of who owns what. Treaty of Paris. But I'm foreshadowing now for the next review period. There's a problem for England. They got a whole lot of land out of this war in the North American continent. They got a whole lot of land. They also got a whole lot of debt. You see, Pitt's strategic change is expensive. And the French and Indian War is being fought concurrently with the 7 Years' War in Europe. After this war, England's in debt. They go from $8 million to $140 million in debt, or pounds in debt. They say to themselves, we can't keep doing this. We got more land to administrate and defend on this frontier, or on this North American continent. They got to start paying for themselves. No more salutary neglect. We're going to strictly enforce what we say. We're going to stop smuggling. We're going to increase taxation on them, and they're going to do it because, by God, they have great benefit being in our empire. That foreshadows the next unit. Just imagine it this way. You're given a great deal of liberty by your parents, and then all of a sudden they take it back. We are colonies that have matured in our independence through salutary neglect. And now England is going to say, no, too expensive to allow that, we're going to take it back. And that sets you up for the next review. And it is 4:15, I made it. Questions? Any questions? The reason we put it on film so you can start and stop.
Where's the video going to be?
Where's the video going to be?
I haven't figured it out yet.
We're going to try to put up maybe a YouTube channel or